Hi, Joe Cerrone. Welcome to CAD 117, and this is our weekly Zoom meeting. The meetings are the same link every week, so if I don't post this, just look for the last link. They'll be the same link every time, and then I'll record it and I'll post that. I just throw them up on YouTube. We're staying in Module 2, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at creating primitives and solids and composites in Module 2. And our assignment is to take these two-dimensional sketches and to make them into three-dimensional drawings. And so if we look at the sketches, they look like this. And it's just a grid that we're using. We don't have dimensions on it. If we go to Content and we go to Module 2, before I get there, I can see that I'm on the page for 3D modeling AutoCAD book. And that's kind of how we have this laid out. If we look at the sequence of topics, what I'm going to try to do to stay on task is to kind of follow this outline here. And so chapter 2, creating primitives and composites. And then I guess this is supposed to be the third, so I'll have to back that up. And we can look at chapter 3, but it looks like this one's probably going to be pushed back a little bit. We still have plenty of time with it. And so the way that it's laid out, we have two books. We have the Technical Drawing 101 and we have the AutoCAD Comprehensive. And in the AutoCAD book, creating primitives and composites, it's really just good to learn. And from somebody who's been doing 3D for a while, I can kind of walk you through some great techniques. So I made a PowerPoint for this, and I also got the textbook. And so the textbook that you're going to look at is the 3D Modeling AutoCAD book. And if you purchase the book, it's in two parts. It's in a basic and it's in an advanced. And the advanced is all 3D. And it just starts with chapter 1, 2, and 3. And so you can download this and you can look at it like this. So when we go through and we start working with these primitives, and I'm going to pause the tape for 1 second and ask a question here. Resuming, when we look at the textbook, primitives are kind of the way we start off with 3D. And essentially, when we talk about 8 solid primitives in AutoCAD, box, cone, cylinder, polysolid, pyramid, they're basically just shapes. And AutoCAD is set up when you use the modeling ribbon to allow you to just pull them right off the menu. And so if we look at a box or a cylinder or a cone, they dimension these out. And so when we make a box, we'll be going from corner to corner. So if I switch back to AutoCAD and I just go to, let's pull up one that has some things on it like this. If I just slide this over to the side, and you'll notice the interface here is the two-dimensional interface. And you might say, well, Joe, I haven't been doing AutoCAD that long. Well, you probably had the first class. The way you switch the workspace is with this little workspace gear. There's a couple of different ones on here somewhere, but this one's the easiest to find. And go to 3D modeling. Basics is the same, it's just watered down. It has less options. When you switch over to 3D modeling, the ribbon will change and the menu bar will disappear. So I turn the menu bar back on. And then here's our primitives. And it'll go on whatever layer I have. So I'm just going to go and set this up to a visible layer. When you create primitives, it's best to work in an isometric view. I always use this one. Al likes to use the view cube. Southeast isometric is a good angle to work with in 3D. And if I go with a box, what it's going to ask me is for the corners and then the height. Now, this is what's called a visual style. The visual style is a wireframe. And if you change the visual style to conceptual, it'll be filled. If you change the visual style to X-ray, you'll be able to see through it, semi-transparent. Let's leave it on X-ray. That looks pretty cool. You can also do things like change the colors. I know Wojcik was asking me about colors and stuff. What I like to do is I like to add toolbars. And so I'll go to this tool pull down, toolbars, AutoCAD, and I'll add a toolbar for properties. Because you use properties all the time, and properties are color, line type, and line weight. By layer just means that the layer follows the properties. So if I wanted to change to a different color, let's say green, now I'm overriding it, and I could go here and I could say cylinder, and it should be green. Yeah. And so there's my cylinder. And it's just like the textbook. When we looked at that textbook where it's asking us the center of the circle, the radius, and the height. So when we work with the cone, it's going to do the same: center, radius, and height. And there are options in CAD that allow you to do even more with it. And so if I come back here and then we go with cone, center, radius, and there's the height. Now, notice there's a downward arrow in the heads up display. It's called something, I forget. I'll remember in a bit. But you have the ability to change the top radius at a 2-point, or I'm not sure what these other two are, but top radius is pretty straightforward. If I go to top radius, I can go through and do something like this. And when you start working with these primitives, you can really, kind of get into it where you can go and you can click on these, and then I can tweak them with grips. I could change the height if I wanted to. I was looking for these grips down here on the bottom, because if I wanted to make a lamp, I could make this into the pole of the lamp. I could make another cylinder. And then I could move it. Now, when you work with these, you're going to want to work with O snaps. And here's where you have your O snaps. I like to guide students to the drafting settings because it's a little more visual. And so snap and grid don't need to be on for this one. I could turn it off. I'll leave it alone. Polar tracking you want on. Object snap you want on. And 3DO snaps I'm going to enable so I can make my lamp. And so with the 3DO snaps, they grab 3D geometries. And so I could go and move this cylinder from the center to the center. And there's two centers. There's a top one and there's a bottom one. So you want to be careful which one you pick. I chose the top one. And then I can do the same. If I want to make my lamp, I can move this, hit enter to end the selection, and then get the O snap down on the bottom. Doesn't look like it wants to. Let's see what I get. Since it's not quite where I want it, I might be able to move it. If I hover, there it is, like that. And so that's an example of primitives and just sort of a primitive shape, something that we could model, something like an old video game. When you look at old video games, they're very blocky like that. All right, let's continue. If we go back to the chapter, I don't think I need to make all of these to kind of show you them. Since I'm already at 10 minutes into the video, I'll go another 5 minutes. So they go through creating boxes, cones, and all these different shapes. And then they start talking about Boolean activities. And so when we get into what they call Boolean activities, what it is it's the ability to glue things together or to separate things. So we can create all these different 3D shapes. This is our visual styles. I changed it to X-ray. These are some other shapes. They're really fun. I mean, when you start getting into it, I can go through and I can 3D print these. I've actually gone through, I just taught a class where I 3D printed a name tag. So here's what I wanted to talk about was composite solids. I call it Boolean Activities, and here it is, Boolean. And so you can union, subtract, and intersect. Mostly you're going to do these first two. And what it'll allow you to do is to fuse them together into different shapes. And so if I come back here to my AutoCAD, to my lamp, if I go over to these Boolean in solid editing, I can union them, and I can just put a box around them and hit enter. And now they're all attached. So it's like one object. And then if we wanted to go over here and maybe create a sphere on the corner of a cube, we can then come over here and we can subtract it. Subtract, large shape has to be picked first, then you hit enter, and then you hit the smaller shape. And it'll take a bite out of it. And so that's Boolean Activities. Very neat, very straightforward once you start to learn how to use them. And so intersect will give you the common area of them, and subtract will take things out. So if we come back to our model here and I put another sphere on the corner, and then I wanted to, you can see union, and we did subtract. So let's try interference. And so intersect, sorry. You take these two and it'll just give you the common area, what's left between the two of them. Shift middle mouse wheel, if you push it, will let you orbit or rotate. And I like to play Xbox games, so kind of getting to that 3D interface. But if you type in orbit, it's on here somewhere, but you'll get this little orbit icon. If you right click, you can actually go through and set up some of the orbit things like navigation. I like to use a visual aid called a compass, because see how you have this Z and then you have the X and the Y, and it just kind of lets you kind of see it as you start to orbit, which direction you're going around the part. So you can create these solids using primitives and then Booleans to start to create shapes. And so they kind of go through, we can talk about helixes and things in another video, sweeps. It's sort of a more advanced way of working with 3D. We do want to work with regions, because the idea of making something into a 3D object more commonly than using primitives is to make a 2D model and then to extrude it. And so here's an example. They made this square with holes in it. And then what they did is they made a region out of it. And I'll show you why we do that. So if I come back here to AutoCAD and I go to a top view, you bail out of this, escape. I'm going to repeat that so I can get rid of the visual aid. There we go. And then if I go into the top view, just like with these shapes, I can take a shape and I can create it. And so if I make a rectangle, and I'm just going to eyeball where I put a hole or two into it, and kind of track, as you can see. It's a little harder than it looks, but once you get it figured out, it works quite well. And so if we have something like this, and then we change it to an isometric view, and if we extrude it, what happens is you get surfaces. No, this was okay, not on this, I'm not getting it, because this was created with the rectangle command. But if I explode it, say I created it with lines, because that's what happens when you create 2D geometry typically. And then I extrude it, you'll get a surface. Okay, and a surface kind of looks like a spider web or a screen. And that's only on lines. If it's an enclosed polyline or if it's a closed shape, that's the secret to working with CAD. is that you have to have closed shapes. This will be, if I click on it and I right click and I go quick properties, this will be a solid. Whereas if it was a line and I look at the properties for that, it's a surface. We want solids because we can do more with them. These are like eggshells, and this is more like clay. Undo that because I want that back. I was kind of hoping that I would be able to keep the 2D geometry on that, so I'm just going to undo it until it's back. So we create regions, and by creating a region, we're able to then make it into a solid shape. And so if I go region and I put a box around it, and then I hit enter, now it's created a shape for this. And then if I extrude this, and let's go up with this, I'm going to have to go to wireframe so that I can do the other circles and extrude those. And I'll extrude those to the same height. Then if I shade this, everything occupies the same area, so I can subtract out base shape, enter, and then the parts to be removed. You have to kind of get it so that it talks to you. You want to get the glyph to highlight the cylinder. And then you can hit enter. And then if I orbit, shift middle mouse wheel, those are holes. And so that's some real basic 3D modeling. And we'll go through modify commands and things like on the solids menu here. We can do things like filleting edges and rounding corners as we go through the course. Okay, that's a basic rundown on this chapter 2 of the 3D AutoCAD book. I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll make another recording for some of the other material.